Hey everybody, what's up? Ehren here, Question Period Canada. We've got a great show lined up for you, the live broadcast, a new sweetened version of the Question Period. No translators, we're running that live with a broadcast. We've put that together. So we're gonna jump straight in. Let's get going and kick things off. Question Period Canada.
But, Mr. Speaker, people do not have roofs over their head after 8 years of this Prime Minister. Housing costs have doubled. Toronto's the worst housing bubble in the world, and Canada has the worst mortgage bubble in the entire OECD after 8 years of his policies. That's why nearly 4 million people on X alone have watched my groundbreaking and much acclaimed documentary, Housing Hell, How We Got Here and How We Will Get Out. Will the Prime Minister become the 4 millionth Canadian to watch this documentary so he can see a common sense plan to reverse the housing hell that he's caused?
Tough times out there.
Speaker, Canadians need our bold action to keep moving forward on the problem of housing affordability. Unlike the Conservative leader, we know that the federal government plays an essential role in leadership in housing. On this side, we're making historic investments in housing, we're linking public transit dollars to housing density, and we're working with cities to modernize and accelerate the way we build homes. While the Conservative leader focuses on clickbaits and views, we're focused on building homes for Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's funny, he released a video the very same day of him in a starter home pretending that he was a real estate agent, but in reality everyone laughed because they know that he's doubled the housing cost.
Right.
He's delivered an economy where we have the fewest homes per capita of any country in the G7, even though we have the most land to build on. And Toronto is now the worst housing bubble in the world after 8 years of this Prime Minister. So that's why I'm putting partisanship aside and offering the Prime Minister and the Liberal caucus a private screening of my documentary. Will the Prime Minister put his ego aside and join with me personally to take in this
being pretty funny.
Housing Hell, How We Got In, and How We'll Get Out of it?
Kind of put it to Trudeau right there. It's pretty funny.
Mr. Speaker, as the Conservative leader continues to call for the federal government to get out of the business of housing. And we will not repeat the same mistakes he made when he was housing minister under Stephen Harper. The Conservative leader's present plan won't build enough homes fast enough, doesn't reach enough cities, and creates unnecessary red tape. He'd also defund affordable housing projects and tax affordable rental construction even more. While the Conservative leader focuses on clickbait and views, we're going to focus on building Canadians more homes.
They're minimizing each other so much. It's really funny.
He did try to make a video. It was a total failure. His videos don't get clicks and his houses don't have bricks. After 8 years, that's why housing costs have doubled. He shouldn't have to read his entire answer. I'm offering to inform him. If he would just take 15 minutes away from his photo ops, he can watch my brilliant documentary on X or YouTube with a common sense plan to require cities permit 15% more homes, give them bonuses if they exceed the target, require transit around every new federally funded, require housing around every federally funded transit station, and sell off 6,000 buildings. This is common sense. Let's bring it home.
Pretty funny. He's promoting his documentary quite a bit.
Mr. Speaker,
Trudeau won't like that.
The Conservative leader's plan is to pick fights with municipalities, to create more red tape, and to withdraw funding for affordable housing and affordable apartments. That's not a plan to build more housing, but he has demonstrated that he's extremely satisfied with his ability to spread misinformation and disinformation online, which, yes, I will admit, he's very good at. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we're focused on delivering solutions for Canadians. We're focused on building more housing for Canadians, not focused on self-aggrandizement like the Leader of the Opposition.
There's a lot of insulting going back and forth, huh?
Mr. Speaker, he is the king of self-aggrandizement, as evidenced by the fact that he's mocking my much-acclaimed documentary when he claims he hasn't even watched it. How will we know about the common sense solutions if he hasn't had the attention span to sit there for 15 minutes on YouTube or X and watch it, Mr. Speaker. We'll even try to get it on TikTok so that he can find it. Mr. Speaker, it includes a common sense plan.
That's quite a joke.
And taxes so that we can bring it home.
It's pretty funny. The TikTok's Chinese, right? So it's funny.
Mr. Speaker, when I came into question period today, I didn't think I'd be hearing an infomercial for how great Pierre Poilievre's social media skills. Sorry, the leader.
We'll back up. I mean, the Honourable Prime Minister knows he's not supposed to use the names of members of Parliament. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize. I didn't think Canadians were going to be hearing an infomercial for the Leader of the Opposition's YouTube page. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is Canadians deserve a government focused on delivering housing for them. That is exactly what we are doing with historic deals with cities right across the country, with measures to build more housing quickly. We are concretely solving that while he's talking to himself online.
East.
These out-of-touch Liberals have let the housing crisis get so bad
We skipped
that
the
in
block
Halifax
part.
this winter, a man died alone in a tent. The average rent in Halifax is now over $2,000 a month. Leaving it up to big developers won't bring down rents. People are being rental evicted. We need real action, not just words. The Liberals are running around announcing and re-announcing existing funding that will not deliver homes for another 4 to 7 years. Will the Prime Minister take immediate action to secure existing empty buildings to get people off the streets this winter?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are continuing to reach out and work with communities, with municipalities, and with provinces right across the country to deliver. We've been announcing projects
coalition's
completed
breaking
that we
down.
started years ago. We're announcing projects that are starting today that will be completed in the coming years. We understand the efforts involved in solving this housing crisis. It requires us all to roll up our sleeves, which is why we put forward $4 billion in a housing accelerator to make sure that municipalities could build more homes. We're putting forward $15 billion to accelerate the construction of rental units. We're going to continue to be there for low-income and homeless people as well.
I don't think the Liberals didn't even clap that time.
Prices aren't going down. A record number of Canadians are turning to food banks for their meals. Before the doors open at Bridges to Hope Food Bank in St. John's, there's already a lineup waiting to collect food hampers. Meanwhile, big grocers like Sobeys, who was here yesterday, are seeing heaps of excess profit, all while offering a nickel to its employees. The Liberals are failing to lower food prices.
Coalition's breaking down.
Crack down on the corporate greed that is driving Canadians to food banks.
Like, that guy doesn't want to be a part of a coalition government, I'm pretty sure.
Competition means lower prices, more choice, and more innovative products and services for Canadians. Our affordability legislation will empower the Competition Bureau to hold grocers accountable and prioritize consumers' interests. The Fall Economic Statement proposes further amendments to the Competition Act to crack down on predatory pricing, to better respond to anti-competitive mergers, and more. We are ensuring that Canadians have more competitive options, and we're limiting excess profits by corporations at the expense of Canadians.
They're not even clapping for him. What's wrong with the Liberals today?
We just heard shocking testimony at the Human Resources Committee from the CEO of the Central Okanagan Food Bank. He says projections are another 100% increase in food bank demand in the next 3 to 4 months due to inflation. He expressed how donors and volunteers are now clients. Liberal inflationary spending and carbon tax are adding to the cost of food. After 8 years, this NDP Liberal government is just not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister take the tax off of farmers, families, and First Nations? Finally.
The
It's
Honourable
time.
Minister of Families.
Mr. Speaker, we will continue to invest in strengthening social security programs like Old Age Security, Canada Pension Plan, and support for families like the Canada Child Benefit and $10 a day national childcare. Programs which the Conservatives continue to vote against, totally lacking empathy and understanding for the struggle that Canadian families are facing. On this side of the House, we'll continue to do the hard work to ensure that we're there to support Canadian families.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that answer won't satisfy all the Canadians lining up in a food bank for the first time in their lives, or the food banks that are losing donors and volunteers due to Liberal inflation. We heard from not-for-profits how they see the rising price of gas as a barrier to volunteering, and how senior volunteers are being forced back to work to afford basic necessities due to inflation. After 8 years, this NDP Liberal government is just not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister take the carbon tax off of farmers, families and First Nations? Finally.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's important that we focus on affordability for families, and it's also important that we look at facts when it comes to
sorry,
carbon
everybody.
price.
Just see if we can get this back on track. Sorry, everybody.
That we've put in place. It's also important to remind Conservative members that they ran on a carbon price, and carbon pricing is the most efficient and the cheapest way to lower our emissions, Mr. Speaker. But with respect to food prices, particularly those facing lower income families, Mr. Speaker, today an article lists here that 94% of
I don't like it when he's reading from his phone.
$50,000 receive far more rebates, exceeding their carbon tax costs in 2023. Mr. Speaker, lower income folks are enjoying more rebates than carbon costs because our carbon pricing.
I like the way that Mr. Speaker rolls. He just cuts him off. No nonsense. This Chris Donchma.
Liberal government has
hey,
made life
Leslie
unaffordable
Lewis. I haven't
for
seen her in a while.
Canadians in every province and territory. Canadians are suffering under this Prime Minister's oppressive carbon tax. And while he taxes, he also divides, pausing the carbon tax on home heating oil in Atlantic Canada because he wanted votes, while he quadruples the tax on every other Canadian. When will this Prime Minister finally cancel the carbon tax on families, farmers, and First Nations?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, I'll focus my response on an economist's response to the rhetoric in this House with respect to the carbon price. He said if we got rid of the carbon tax and the rebate, then this would harm a much larger fraction of lower and middle income households than it would higher income households, Mr. Speaker. Very clearly, the economist from Calgary indicates that our carbon price sends more money back to 94% of families who earn less than $50,000, Mr. Speaker. It's an affordability measure and it fights climate change.
The Honourable Member for Halden Norfolk.
At a time when this country is working towards reconciliation, the Liberals have saddled First Nations community with a punishing carbon tax. First Nations are so burdened by this unfair tax that they have decided to take the government to court. Canadians everywhere know that this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. So, when will this Prime Minister finally remove the carbon tax from farmers, First Nations, and families?
Yeah, when?
Yeah, when? I enjoy Chris Donchma so much more than Greg Fergus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, I'll note that our carbon pricing mechanism sends more money back to lower income families than it does. That includes both the fiscal amount and the economic impact. And something that Conservatives love not to focus on is the impact of climate change, Mr. Speaker. Climate change impacts the price of food more than any other factor, Mr. Speaker. And we're also helping farmers because farmers are the ones that know climate change is real because it impacts them first, and that's what's driving up the cost of food, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah. Who believes any of that? Who do we got?
Mr. Speaker, I want to help the NDP Liberal government understand why after 8 years, Canadians know that the Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Just look at the carbon tax alone. A recent report by APAS shows that Saskatchewan farmers will pay over $40 million in carbon tax just to get their grains to port. A rebate doesn't even come close to covering that cost for our farmers. The solution is simple. Axe the tax. Why won't they just get it done?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, no.
Leading farmers right across the country.
Larry McCauley's at it again.
They ask me is,
Lord.
why does the Conservative Party of Canada not have a plan for the environment? I tell them we have a plan for the environment. We will work with governments. We will.
I mean, for gosh sakes, he's right here.
Oh.
I can't hear him.
He has a fun way of doing it, though.
Hold on.
At least. Like, look at him smiling. It's pleasant.
Are we ready?
Yeah.
The Honourable Minister of
Colleagues.
Agriculture from the top.
It's much better.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The question that I get from farmers across the country is why the Conservative Party of Canada does not have a plan for the environment. I tell the farmers right across the country, we do have a plan for the environment. We will work with farmers right across the country, and for an example, in Saskatchewan, we announced $4 million with the Western Grain Research Foundation, just to make sure that the farmers stay on the cutting edge, that they're able to yield larger crops and make more profit. We have and will continue to work with farmers right across this country.
Here, here. The Honourable Member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Well, Mr. Speaker, farmers know that they are the leaders when it comes to environmental stewardship. Now, just imagine, Mr. Speaker, that you are a young producer. You grew up on the family farm, and your goal is to take over after your parents retire. You start looking over the bills and the costs associated with farming, and one of the highest line items is the carbon tax imposed by this Prime Minister. Rather than hiring a helping hand or upgrading your machinery, you're paying an increasing carbon tax. So, why won't the Prime Minister let his senators pass Bill C-2, 3, 4 and axe the tax for on-farm fuels?
Patser's no nonsense, eh?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker,
saw Ben Loeb there. I like him too.
The farmers are on the front line of the environment. They know that winds of over 200 kilometers an hour.
He thinks he's in Prince Edward Island right now.
Burns, destroying crops, and floods right across the country, and fires right across the country. They want a government that will deal with the environment and make sure that we work with governments, with agricultural clusters to make sure they're able to meet the demands. We will work and continue to work with the agricultural sector, Mr. Speaker.
I don't mean to be making fun of Larry McCauley, but geez, Christ on a bike. Like, we don't see Rosemary Falk very often.
2 million Canadians are relying on food banks to feed their families. The Prime Minister's punishing carbon tax is directly fueling the affordability crisis in this country, and still the Prime Minister plans to quadruple it. The Prime Minister and his failed policies are simply not worth the cost. It's time to axe the carbon tax before it bankrupts all Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister finally take the carbon tax off for our farmers, our families, and our First Nations?
Axe the tax, guys. Axe the tax.
Mr. Speaker, in addition to the support that I continue to share in this House that we do for families, we've also introduced programs to support organizations that are working with Canadians to help address food insecurity, including over 300 organizations, Mr. Speaker, through the Community Services Recovery Fund. We've also invested almost $150 million to strengthen food systems and improve food security, including over 100 community projects. While the Conservatives continue to impose these investments, Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to work on behalf of Canadians.
I made a short video on genocides, and it's very funny. Like just a minute. It's really funny.
Are simply not listening to farmers. A pork farmer with a pork farm just down the road where I grew up, his natural gas bill in February was $4,300 just for natural gas. His carbon tax, $3,300, 75%. How can any farmer make a living when you got to pay that much carbon tax on the natural gas you use on your farm? When will the Prime Minister take the tax off farmers, families, and make it fair for farmers? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Oh, Lord, again.
I appreciate my honourable colleague.
Where's Trudeau?
But the fact of the matter is, farmers are concerned about the environment. Farmers are on the front lines. Farmers understand that you have to take care of the environment. When you have winds of over 200 kilometers an hour destroying all the infrastructure
you think there's a storm right now.
on the property, that adds no doubt to the farmers' costs. It adds to the price of food. It adds to everything. That's why it's so important that our government has an environmental plan to make sure that our agricultural sector will continue to thrive.
Just say, I have seen this already. It gets worse.
Canadians are experiencing the horrific impacts of the climate crisis, while liberals delay, disappoint, and fail to protect our planet. Young people are not only worried about their future, they want to be part of the solution. Hundreds of them just delivered mock cover letters applying for a youth climate corps, and 2 out of 3 young people would consider enrolling in this program to respond to disasters, to create climate resilient infrastructure, and to reduce emissions. Today, I tabled a motion to create a youth climate corps like President Biden did. Will the Prime Minister listen to our future leaders and establish a youth climate corps?
Did she say like Biden did? That's the example we should be using?
And I'd just like to take a moment to welcome my friend and colleague back to the House. It's good to have her back, not only because it's good to talk about how we fight climate change and not whether we fight climate change in this House. Mr. Speaker, I think the idea with respect to a youth environment corps to fight climate change and bring forward great ideas is an awesome one, and I'm looking forward to talking with the member. And it also gives me great pleasure to announce in this House that Canada is the first country ever to commit to an oil and gas methane emissions target reduction. 75%, Mr. Speaker. Other countries will follow in our footsteps, and we'll bring down our methane emissions by 75% by 2030. Thank you, Mr.
Vanderkoven's full of it today, man.
Deputy Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
After 8 years,
We just skipped the block again.
They cannot rely on the NDP. The NDP leader initially called for the release of EV contracts, but last night the NDP flip-flopped and voted with the Liberals to bury them. These contracts will cost taxpayers over $40 billion. That's about $3,000 per Canadian family, and the money will be used to fund foreign replacement workers instead of Canadian paychecks. The NDP Liberal government betrayed workers and are complicit in cover-up. So what did the Liberals offer the NDP to get them to change their position and abandon workers and taxpayers?
What do you guys think of Garda Genius?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Investments like the
Lord.
Stellantis EV battery plant represent a win for the economy, a win for Canadian workers,
Barely
and a
can
win
read.
for the fight against climate change. But the Conservatives are so committed to their doomsday narrative that they just can't admit that anything good is happening. In a recent article in the Globe and Mail, a journalist writes about the Conservative leader. He has not said he opposes subsidizing these battery makers. Rather, he is seeking to rile up working class voters by falsely suggesting foreigners might be stealing their jobs. While the Conservatives are blinded by their self-induced rage, we're focused on realizing a positive vision for the future of our economy.
I get a kick out of that Ryan Turnbull. He's a simpleton.
Chatter in the chamber. Just hope we bring it down just a little bit. The honourable member for
Then he just rolls with it. See, Greg would stand up there for 10
For
minutes.
the member, if the NDP Liberal government is genuinely proud of their work, then release the contracts. Let all of us see them so that we can know. But the NDP is complicit with the Liberals in trying to bury these contracts. Why? Every Canadian family will pay $3,000 for these deals. So they want to know what is in these deals for them. Again, what did the Liberals offer the NDP to get them to change their position, abandon workers, and hide these contracts? What are they hiding?
What are they hiding?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Why wouldn't they just show the contract if there's nothing to hide? There's something to hide.
It's a great pleasure to share positive news.
Looks
Canada
like it.
is number 3 in the world in foreign direct investment, which is something that we should all be proud of, Mr. Speaker. Brendan Sweeney from the Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturers said, and I quote, about specialized expertise workers needed from outside of Canada to help set up the giant facility. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of Windsorites going off to the U.S. to help set up, test, and service machinery in plants. It's a little hypocritical to fail to take into account the way foreign direct investment works.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
To help
All right.
pay for
Barrett's
overseas
up.
replacement workers, the NDP Liberal government is going to
Slick.
send every Canadian family a
One of my
bill
favorites.
for $3,000. The
military guy.
pro-worker NDP have refused to stand up to the Prime Minister.
Minister and demand the release of contracts that detail the number of foreign replacement workers that are going to take Canadian jobs. This Prime Minister clearly isn't worth the cost to Canadian workers after 8 years, and neither are the NDP. So will the Prime Minister finally stand up and tell Canadians how many foreign replacement workers $40 billion buys?
The Honourable Minister.
It's a lot of money, $40 billion.
You know, it's curious
Bolsonaro,
after 8
what a
years
joke.
in opposition to listen from these Conservatives and how little they have learned on foreign direct investment, Mr. Speaker, clearly nothing. How little they understand about free trade deals, Mr. Speaker, clearly nothing. How little they understand about creating good middle-class jobs, Mr. Speaker. What they are clearly against is 2,500 full-time jobs at the Stellantis plant, 2,300 construction jobs there. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that under a Conservative administration, Canada would be closed for business. Guess what, Mr. Speaker? Not on our watch.
The Honourable Member for
These guys are acting like things are good out there.
Let's talk about
They're
what's
terrible.
happened under their watch. The Canadian Building Trade Union says that so far, this NDP Liberal government has cost them $300 million in wages. So if they are so proud of their record and so proud of these great deals that are going to cost every Canadian family $3,000, why won't they just release the contracts? They know that releasing those contracts will expose that $40 billion is buying a lot of foreign replacement workers that should instead be funding Canadian paychecks. Why won't they release the contracts today?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, there are smart people on the Conservative benches, including trade lawyers and people who understand that contracts between nations and between countries need to stay confidential because of important trade secrets. Mr. Speaker, what do the Conservatives have against the fact that Canada is now third in the world in foreign direct investment, Mr. Speaker, after the United States, after Brazil? Who is it? Canada, ahead of China. Mr. Speaker, clearly they're against Dow in Fort Saskatchewan. They're against Stellantis. They're against Bécancour. When are the Conservatives going to be on the side of workers, Mr. Speaker? I don't know. Maybe they do.
It didn't come out right, Randy. You screwed it up.
Went up, je comprends pas, là. L'honorable député de Middlesex, London.
In little under a decade, Canada's housing costs have basically doubled. Earlier today, members of the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations shared with me a story of 7 individuals living in one apartment. We know that there are many similar stories about this across this country. After 8 years, students are becoming homeless under this NDP Liberal government. This PM is not worth the cost. When will this government step aside so we can get Canada back on track?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for her question, and I thank the members of the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations for their advocacy. In fact, I used to be a member when I was in student government at St. FX University.
I went to St.
Mr.
FX.
Speaker, I should say, when we actually compare the policies of the Conservative Party to the policies that the government is putting forward, it is clear that their policies will do more harm than good and raise the cost of living. We are putting policies in place that's going to remove the tax on new apartment construction so we get more apartments built. They are going to put the tax back on. Mr. Speaker, we're investing in affordable housing when they're campaigning on a commitment to make sure they do not invest. When it comes to supporting students and the housing that they need, the solutions lay on our side of the House.
Mr. Speaker, under this
No
Prime
Bloc
Minister,
Québécois around here.
workers are struggling to pay the rent. After 8 years, he's just not worth the cost. While rents are too high in major cities, recent increases have been the biggest in New Brunswick. According to Stats Canada, rent has inflated nearly 30% just in New Brunswick in the last 4 years alone. Will the Prime Minister agree that now is the time to get the gatekeepers out of the way so more rental housing can be built in the province of New Brunswick?
Stewart looks like a gangster.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for his question. When it comes to actually getting gatekeepers out of the way and reducing red tape, I point the honourable member that we recently signed an agreement with the city of Moncton so they can change the way they allowed cities to be built in that city. We are going to see thousands of new homes in the city, and now we are working with other cities in across New Brunswick and rural communities as well. What's fascinating, Mr. Speaker, if the Conservatives were concerned about reducing the cost of rent, they should abandon their plans to put the GST back on rental construction. They should avoid the mistakes of the past by abandoning their commitment to stop investing in affordable housing. We will get
He just cuts him off. Donchma is smooth.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal NDP government's incompetence and lack of caring, we have seen a housing hell unleashed on Canadians. They've actively caused housing, mortgages, and housing-related costs to double in the last 8 years. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. We have people living in tent cities and in their cars, Mr. Speaker, and this is when the dream of home ownership is evaporating for younger Canadians. They are putting photo ops ahead of housing. When will this Prime Minister realize that he's built more tent cities than houses?
The Honourable Minister.
A lot of tent cities out there, I guess. They said 30 here in Halifax?
The enormously difficult situation that families are going through who are having trouble affording the cost of a place to live. But I will not accept criticisms from that member or the Conservative Party of Canada when they stand up to, when the cameras are on, to make hay for a political reason, when they had the opportunity to stand up to vote on whether we should support initiatives that are going to help the homeless population in Canada, they vote against them. They are currently campaigning on a promise to get out of the business of housing. We've made that mistake for 30 years. We started this government in 2017 with the National Housing Strategy to invest in affordable housing. We need to invest, not make cuts, as that member wants to.
The Honourable Member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Mr. Speaker, in British Columbia, 2 people died, and one is still missing at sea because their vessel could not be found. It was discovered that life-saving direction-finding technology has been unavailable. Those on the water deserve to know that help will be there to find them. But instead of investing in the safety of people, the Liberals followed the lead of the Conservatives, slashing funding and closing 10 Coast Guard communication centres. Canadians deserve better. When will the government provide the Coast Guard with the necessary resources to keep mariners safe?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Bit of a strange question for
Coast Guard.
Mr. Speaker,
question period in the
ensuring the health and
Commons.
safety of Canadians at
Mike
sea
Kellaway,
is a top
huh?
priority for our government. The Coast Guard is working around the clock to modernize and replace the radio detection system with a more robust and accurate network. While this work continues, Mr. Speaker, there are a wide variety of other systems in place, including a radar installation and shipboard detection finding system on Coast Guard vessels. But be reassured, Mr. Speaker, and I want Canadians to be reassured that the Coast Guard's mission of safety at sea is unimpeded by this work.
The Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, this summer Canada relied on volunteer firefighters and search and rescue to risk their lives to keep us safe, but the Liberals have been letting them down. 9,500 volunteer firefighters quit in 2023, and the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, who are here today, say that doing the work and paying for the equipment is unaffordable. Well, the Liberals are in luck. The NDP has a bill that would up the volunteer firefighter tax credit to $10,000. So will the government support our volunteer firefighters by voting yes on the NDP's plan to increase the volunteer firefighter tax credit?
It's an interesting idea.
For the very important question. In fact, actually, just yesterday I was in West Kelowna visiting the firefighters after the devastating wildfires that took place in West Kelowna and all across British Columbia. We talked about many different measures that the firefighters we're going to be supporting, in addition to training of 1,000 firefighters, and we have a lot of options currently on the table, but make no doubt about it, Mr. Speaker, we will be supporting our firefighters. Thank you.
Good. And that's all the time.
Well, guys.
I've got a recognition to do.
Do you see
do
how
some points of
smoothly
order afterward.
things go when Greg Fergus isn't around? It's kind of funny. Trudeau was there today. He was lame, though. He answered. He went toe-to-toe with Poilievre and lost. And then I guess he left. I guess he answered a couple of NDP questions, too. But then he bailed. Sent in poor old Larry McCauley. Don't do that to him or us, right? Silly. Anyhow, hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back tomorrow. Let me know in the comments if you guys enjoy not having to watch the translators and the big delays that the Speaker of the House would put in there. I find Chris Donchma's fine. I can watch him all the time. Like, even when he does have to make an interruption, it doesn't disrupt the flow. He's smoother and friendlier about it. More professional, I think. Like, if you're going to be the playground attendant, you've got to understand the kids are going to misbehave and act out. When they do, standing there and trying to teach them a life lesson, that might not be... Anyways, I'm Ehren. This is Question Period Canada. It's been a blast. We put out a video just a little while ago about the trouncing debate, the fiery debate where FRASER got cooked by POILIEVRE yesterday. I just dropped that a little while ago, so check that out. And I'm going to put a short out tonight with Jenna Suds. I think is really funny. Anyway, that's it, guys. We'll get going. We'll catch you tomorrow here. It's great hanging out with you guys, chatting. For now, we're going to head out, try to keep warm. Have a good evening.